I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you're driving down your local main street.
Right?
Like, it's a route you take every single day. The radio is on, you've got your coffee just sitting in the cup holder, and everything about the morning feels, completely unremarkable.
Yeah, just a normal Tuesday.
Exactly. But as you pass the intersection, maybe near the pharmacy, I want you to consider how many unseen digital eyes just recorded you driving by.
It's a lot more than people think.
Oh, totally. Because in a fraction of a second, an automated camera logged your license plate number, the make and model of your car, the color, and like the exact timestamp of when you drove past.
Yeah.
It is this completely frictionless, totally invisible capture of your physical location in the world. But now, I want you to imagine that just a few miles ahead of you on that exact same road, a human trafficker is driving a stolen car,
Wow. Okay.
and there's an abducted child sitting in the back seat. In that specific moment, with that reality unfolding just down the street from you, do you want those digital eyes turned on or do you want them turned off?
Man, that is the kind of question that just makes you squirm, right?
Yeah, it really does.
Because it traps us. It forces us to look at two realities that society desperately prefers to keep, isolated from one another.
Right, in separate boxes.
Exactly.
Uh,
On one hand, you have the fundamental reality of everyday privacy, your right to simply move through your own community without the state tracking your every turn.
which is a big deal.
It's a massive deal. But then, on the other hand, you have the visceral reality of a physical, time-sensitive emergency. Someone is in immediate danger, and a moving vehicle is the literal only thing carrying them further away from safety.
And navigating that incredibly uncomfortable crossroads is exactly the mission of our deep dive today.
I'm really looking forward to this one.
Me too. We are looking at a highly structured, heavily debated position paper. It was written by an independent researcher named Zachary David Enfield back in August of 2026.
All right.
And the paper is titled, How Dark Do You Want the Road? A Civil Liberties and Public Safety Case for Regulated Flock/ALPR Networks.
It's quite a title.
It is. And we are diving into the deeply polarized, often vitriolic debate over automated license plate readers, or ALPRs.
Yeah, vitriolic is the right word. People get really heated about this.
They really do. And what stands out immediately about this source material is that the author just completely rejects the standard talking points from both sides.
It really does. He's not interested in the usual argument.
Well, right. We're trying to move past this exhausting binary where one side just yells, mass surveillance, and the other side yells back, think of the children.
Which gets us nowhere.
Exactly. We're looking for a third path here. Can we figure out a way to regulate the digital eye without entirely blinding the physical road?
Which is an incredibly tall order. I mean, let's be honest.
It is a huge order, and I want to say this directly to you, the listener, right up front. Whether you are a staunch privacy advocate who views literally any government tracking as an existential threat,
Which is valid.
totally valid. Or whether you're a parent whose absolute ultimate terror is the unthinkable happening to your kid, this deep dive is going to test your boundaries.
Oh, absolutely.
Because to really understand this, we have to examine the actual mathematics of physical roads, the strange ways that historical marriage laws shaped our modern morality, and some surprisingly heavy literary philosophy.
Yeah, the marriage law part really threw me when I first read it, but it connects so well.
It really does. But to anchor all of that theory, the source material starts with a very specific, tangible catalyst.
Right. It takes us to August 4th, 2026 in the city of Ord, Nebraska.
Yes, Ord. It's a pretty small city, but it essentially became ground zero for this entire national debate.
Yeah.
On that day, the Ord City Council voted unanimously to just remove all its flock safety cameras. They became the poster child for what is now known as the National Deflock movement.
Deflock, yeah. I remember when that started trending.
Yeah. Right. And they weren't an anomaly in that specific area either. Earlier that same year, in January 2026, the Valley County Board of Supervisors had these similarly intense public debates about how access to this data was being handled.
But then, you look right next door.
Yeah.
You see a completely inverted reality. The Kearney Police Department in Buffalo County, they've been using this exact same tech since 2021.
Right.
And they, along with police in South Sioux City, were reporting that these cameras were completely indispensable. I mean, they were recovering stolen vehicles, solving hit and runs, and locating missing persons at unprecedented rates.
So this contrast is just vital to understand. Ord is a perfect microcosm of the national tension.
Yeah, because the residents in that town, they didn't just wake up one morning consumed by, like, irrational paranoia.
No, not at all.
They were asking the exact questions that a functioning democracy requires its citizens to ask. They wanted to know the mechanics of the system. Like, who owns this data once it leaves the camera?
Right. Who holds the keys to the search bar?
Exactly. If a local camera captures my car, is that data kept for 3 days or 3 years?
And can an outside agency in another state suddenly access our local infrastructure without our permission?
Which is a huge concern.
But let me stop you there, though, because when I was reading the breakdown of what actually happened in Ord, I found myself getting a bit, frustrated with the deflock strategy.
Really? How come?
Well, if a town council looks at a specific tech vendor and says, you know, we don't like your data sharing agreement, it's too opaque, ripping the cameras out of the ground just feels like a massive overreaction.
I see what you mean.
Aren't they throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Like, if the contract is the problem, why is complete technological blindness treated as the only acceptable form of civil liberty? Why not just, write a stricter contract?
It's a fair criticism, it really is.
Yeah.
But you have to put yourself in the shoes of a part-time city council in a small town.
Okay.
They are going up against a multi-billion-dollar tech apparatus, writing an airtight local ordinance regarding, data federation, retention limits, and API access.
That's a lot of jargon.
Exactly. It requires a level of technological and legal expertise that most small municipalities simply do not have on retainer.
That makes a lot of sense.
When faced with a highly complex, totally opaque system that they cannot fully audit, panic is kind of a rational response. They experience a governance failure, and because they don't know how to fix the governance, they choose a capability failure instead.
Oh, wow. So they just tear it on the camera.
They tear it down.
I see the logic there, even if I don't necessarily agree with the outcome. They're basically confusing the vendor with the technology itself.
Precisely. The argument here is that you don't have to dynamite the highway just because you don't trust the guy operating the toll booth.
That's a great way to put it.
But to understand why communities feel pushed to these extremes, why towns are ripping them down while police departments are literally begging to keep them, we have to cut through all the science fiction.
Yes, we do.
We need to look under the hood at the actual mechanics of what this machine does,
Yeah.
and probably equally importantly, what it physically cannot do.
Let's get into the hardware and software then, because the misinformation around this is just staggering.
Oh, it's everywhere.
An automated license plate reader system, specifically the kind we are talking about here, like Flock Safety's LPR product, is remarkably narrow in its scope.
Very narrow.
It captures a license plate number, the state of origin, an image of the vehicle which provides characteristics like make, model, and color, and it logs the exact date, time, and GPS coordinates of the camera.
Right.
That is the entirety of the payload. It does not collect facial recognition data. It does not identify the driver.
And we really need to be precise about how it actually accomplishes this too, because it isn't just snapping an iPhone picture as you drive by.
No, it's way more complex.
These systems rely heavily on optical character recognition, or OCR. During the day, they use standard optical sensors, but at night, they rely on infrared light.
Okay, infrared.
Yeah, the camera fires an infrared flash that bounces off the retroreflective paint that's used on modern license plates.
Oh, so that's why the plate glows so brightly in those black and white night captures, even when the rest of the car is basically shrouded in darkness.
Exactly. The OCR algorithm isolates that glowing rectangle, detects the edges of the characters, and translates those pixel shapes into alphanumeric text.
Okay, so it turns the picture into actual text data.
Yep. It then takes that text string and queries it against authorized databases. These are often referred to as hot lists, like the FBI's National Crime Information Center, the NCIC.
Right, or lists maintained by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Exactly.
But wait, how does that sync actually happen in real time? Is the camera constantly downloading the entire FBI database to its hard drive?
No, it works through secure API calls. The camera unit itself doesn't hold the massive database.
Okay, that makes more sense.
When it reads a plate, it encrypts that small packet of text and sends it to a secure cloud server. That server pings the NCIC API, essentially asking, is this plate flagged?
And if it is?
If it is, A payload is sent back down to the local police dispatcher's terminal within seconds.
Okay, so the system is just constantly scanning and checking. But the author makes a really massive distinction between two ways this data is used. He talks about real-time alerting and retrospective search.
That distinction is basically the entire ballgame here.
Really?
Yeah. Real-time alerting is forward-looking. The system is asking a very narrow question. Does this specific car passing this specific camera right now match a pre-existing list of vehicles we're actively looking for today?
Got it. And retrospective search.
Retrospective search is entirely different. It is backward-looking. It asks, where did this specific unflagged citizen's car go over the last 30 days?
Oh, yeah, that feels very different. And the paper uses a very specific phrase to describe this underlying functionality. It calls the camera offense agnostic.
Offense agnostic. It's such a brilliant term.
I really like it.
It means the camera possesses no judgment and no X-ray vision. It cannot look into the trunk of a passing sedan and detect illegal narcotics, or stolen firearms, or a kidnapped person.
Right.
All it does is definitively prove that a piece of metal with a specific alphanumeric sequence occupied a specific geometric coordinate at a precise second in time. It doesn't judge the crime, it merely indexes an observation.
I was really trying to conceptualize this, and the best analogy I could come up with is like a highly observant, incredibly boring robotic crossing guard.
I like that.
It just stands at the intersection with a notepad, and it writes down every single car that passes. It doesn't know why you were in the car. It has no idea if you were driving to the pharmacy to pick up life-saving heart medication or if you're casing the pharmacy to rob it after midnight.
Right, it doesn't care.
It just notes, red Honda Civic, plate XYZ, passed at 3 miles per PM, and because it is completely offense agnostic, it is a staggering double-edged sword.
How so? I mean, break that down for me.
Well, because it's just raw location data, the morality of it depends entirely on the user. That exact same camera, running the exact same OCR algorithm, can ingest an Amber Alert, flag a trafficker's van, and literally save a child's life.
Absolutely.
But if that system is completely unregulated, that exact same camera could allow a corrupt police officer to type in their ex-partner's license plate and retrospectively track their daily commute to a domestic violence shelter.
Man, which is the core thesis of the paper right there. We cannot solve this public policy crisis by pretending the data is harmless, because it really isn't.
No, it's not.
But we also cannot solve it by pretending the data is useless,
Yeah.
because it's undeniably effective for specific tasks. The camera's perspective is incredibly limited, just plate, vehicle, place, and time.
Right.
But if you string enough of those tiny, limited perspectives together across an entire city, you aren't just reading plates anymore. You are mapping human life.
And that brings us to the actual physical environment where this all takes place, the geometry of the road.
Right, the math of it.
Because if the camera only captures these tiny slices of time and space, what happens mathematically when a town like Ord starts actively removing those observation points?
The author introduces a mathematical framework here, and he calls it the detection principle.
Okay, let's unpack this.
It relies on a formula. 1 minus the probability of evasion at a given point, usually expressed as 1 minus q subscript I. Now, Q represents the chance that a target vehicle evades detection at a single camera node.
Let's break that math down a little more, because I don't want to gloss over it for you, the listener. How does the evasion probability actually compound?
Think of it like rolling dice. If there is only one camera on the road and a criminal has an 80% chance of evading it, maybe they take a side street, or the camera is momentarily obstructed, then Q is 0.8.
So they have a really high chance of getting away.
Exactly. But if you place a second camera further down the road, you multiply the probabilities. 0.8 times 0.8 is 0.64. The chance of evasion drops to 64%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If a city has 10 cameras forming a perimeter, the mass becomes 0.8 to the power of 10. The probability of evasion plummets to about 10.7%. which means the network has an 89% chance of detecting the vehicle.
That's a massive jump.
The physical constraint of the road network forces the vehicle through these mathematical choke points.
So removing a camera isn't just, losing one picture. It's fundamentally weakening the exponent of the entire safety net.
Exactly.
But I have to give the author credit here. He doesn't try to sell us a fantasy. He doesn't invent some sensationalized statistic claiming that putting up cameras magically drops all crime by 90%.
No, he is very intellectually honest about the limitations.
Yeah.
He cites rigorous studies from the National Institute of Justice, which show incredibly mixed results regarding massive citywide crime drops. You cannot just plaster a city in ALPRs and expect burglaries to vanish overnight. The cameras do not stop crime from happening.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for the critics here.
Yo for it.
If the cameras don't stop crime, and opponents constantly point out that criminals can just use stolen plates or, like, put tinted covers over their license plates or intentionally stick to back roads, aren't we just building a multi-million-dollar surveillance apparatus to catch the absolute dumbest criminals on Earth? Like the ones who forget to hide their plates?
It is the most common pushback you hear at these city council meetings.
Right. It makes sense on the surface.
But the paper points out a logical fallacy there, equating imperfect detection with zero detection.
Okay, explain that.
Remember what the OCR and the visual centers are actually capturing. It is not just the plate. It is the vehicle characteristics. Even if a kidnapper removes the license plate entirely, if an Amber Alert goes out looking for a red 2015 Ford Explorer with a damaged rear bumper, the visual AI in the modern systems can still flag vehicles matching that physical description.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Right. Evasion tactics introduce friction. Absolutely. They lower the effectiveness, but they do not lower it to zero. A human trafficker is constrained by physics.
Right, they can't just teleport.
Exactly. They must occupy physical space, and they must utilize the road network to escape. Every functioning node is an opportunity to intersect their geometry.
And when we are talking about missing persons, time is literally the only metric that matters. The paper pulls Department of Justice statistics showing that by the end of December 2025, 1,312 children had been successfully recovered due to Amber Alerts.
That's a huge number.
Hundreds more were recovered through wireless emergency alerts. Now, an Amber Alert buzzing on your smartphone is basically crowdsourcing observation. It's asking the public to look out their windows.
Right.
The ALPR network is simply an automated, tireless layer of that exact same system.
Which brings us back to the state of Nebraska, because their legislature actually recognized this distinction years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The paper highlights the 2018 Nebraska Automatic License Plate Reader Privacy Act. Within that law, there is an explicit carve-out for missing person emergencies, specifically tying it to lists like the FBI kidnappings and missing persons list.
That's smart.
The lawmakers understood that there is a visceral fundamental difference between the generalized tracking of a commuter and an emergency location ping for a victim in transit.
Because if a parent's child has just been pulled into a strange car, that parent does not give a single damn about philosophical debates over data retention schedules.
No, of course not.
They don't care if the camera is judging the driver's intent. They are asking a purely geographic, completely binary question. Did the physical vehicle holding my child pass this specific point on the road?
Exactly. The emergency is geographic. But, and this is the pivot point of the entire paper, just because a tool has the mathematical capability to locate a missing child, that does not mean the tool is inherently benevolent.
Right.
The incredible power to trace a vehicle's geometry across state lines is precisely what terrifies civil liberties advocates. And we have to be clear here. Their fear is not hypothetical. It's completely valid.
We really have to dig into that fear because the potential for abuse is just staggering. The paper dedicates a massive section to the ACLU's warnings, and they are incredibly sobering.
Very sobering.
The ACLU points to misleading vendor representations, but their primary focus is on the extreme dangers of networked, federated access.
To ground this, the author points to an August 2026 report from Wired magazine. And this wasn't speculative fiction.
Right, this really happened.
Wired documented actual police departments facing internal affairs, investigations, firings, and in some cases, criminal arrests for the blatant misuse of ALPR systems by officers.
Unbelievable.
And then the paper zeroes in on a very specific, highly illustrative case study from Shaker Heights, Ohio.
This case blew my mind. Let's break down exactly what happened in Shaker Heights.
So in Shaker Heights, the city deployed these cameras for local public safety, like looking for stolen cars in their town.
Okay, pretty standard.
But because of how the software sharing settings were configured, outside agencies from entirely different jurisdictions were able to query the Shaker Heights cameras.
Without the town knowing.
Yep. The city eventually discovered that outside entities had run hundreds of searches through their local infrastructure using the search term immigration.
Wow.
These were searches that explicitly violated the local city's policy and intent for those cameras.
I want to pause the discussion right here for a second and make something incredibly clear to you, the listener. We are discussing the Shaker Heights example purely because it is the case study the author uses to illustrate a catastrophic governance failure.
Yes, absolutely.
We are neutrally reporting the contents of the paper. We are not taking any political stance whatsoever on immigration policy, border control, or federal enforcement.
Not at all.
The issue at hand is the mechanics of the technology. A local municipality bought a tool for local problems like stolen cars and discovered that outside actors had completely bypassed local oversight to use the tool for an entirely different mission.
And this really highlights the terrifying reality of scale.
Yeah.
A single isolated camera run by a small-town sheriff is a known quantity, but a massive federated network architecture, that is an entirely different beast.
It really is.
In a federated system, a local police chief might just click a checkbox in the software that says, share with partner agencies, without realizing that partner agencies cascades out to thousands of users across the whole country.
Oh my God, that's insane.
That is the literal definition of mission creep. A town council approves a budget to find missing kids, and suddenly, quietly, the infrastructure is being used to track investigative journalists, monitor the license plates at a political protest, or map out the patients visiting a controversial medical clinic.
So to put this in real-world terms, imagine you give your neighbor a spare key to your house, just for emergencies.
Okay, right.
If there's a fire or your basement floods while you're on vacation, they can get in. But then you come home and find out your neighbor took your key, made 100 copies, and handed them out to 100 complete strangers, just in case one of them ever needs to check your plumbing.
That is a terrifying analogy.
Right. Now, the tech vendors will constantly defend themselves by saying, but we have audit logs. Every single search in the system is recorded and attached to a user profile.
But an audit log is entirely retroactive.
Exactly. Logging just tells you that your house was robbed after the fact.
Yeah, it doesn't stop anything.
It gives you a neat little printout of who walked through your front door. It doesn't actually lock the door to prevent the stranger from walking in the first place.
This is why the underlying data structure is so dangerous. The ALPR database does not know the difference between a search for a violent fugitive and a search for an ex-partner.
The computer doesn't care.
Right. The search box on the screen looks exactly the same to the user typing in the plate number. This leads the author to a critical conclusion. Civil liberty protections must attach to the access purpose, not just a generalized, naive belief that the camera hardware itself is inherently good.
Okay, let's step back and look at the whole board. We've established that this network acts like a massive dragnet.
Right.
And the ACLU's point is that a dragnet catches dolphins along with the tuna. The risks of mission creep, unauthorized access, and mass surveillance are not theoretical. They are documented realities.
We've seen it happen.
So, if the risk is that high, why on earth does the state take it? How does the author justify keeping the cameras at all?
This is where the paper makes a massive shift.
Okay, I was waiting for this.
It moves away from the technical specs of OCR and databases, and it wades into profound legal and literary philosophy.
Which was the most unexpected part of the paper for me, to be honest.
It's brilliant, though. The author sets up a contrast. On one side, you have the physical, actual missing child, the geometry we've been talking about.
Right, the kid in the car.
On the other side, you have what the author terms fictitious minors, which were created entirely by the state. Under federal law, specifically 18 U.S.C. Section 2422B, it is a severe crime not just to coerce or entice a minor, but to attempt to do so.
Okay.
Because the law punishes the intent, the government routinely builds completely fake digital child personas to prosecute adult predators online.
How does that actually work mechanically? Like, what are they doing?
The paper cites a specific case from June 2026 in South Dakota, driven by a state Internet Crimes Against Children task force. In these sting operations, undercover law enforcement officers create fake profiles on social media or chat applications. They use stock photos, invent backstories, and chat with suspects.
Wow.
The defendant in the South Dakota case believed he was communicating with a 12-year-old girl and traveling to meet her. But the girl did not exist. The minor was entirely fictitious.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following the author's logic here, because comparing a digital sting operation in a chat room to a physical surveillance camera on a public highway feels like a massive conceptual leap.
It does seem like a stretch at first.
How does the paper justify connecting those two things?
By looking at the allocation of state resources and the legal definition of harm. The author is pointing out a staggering societal contradiction.
Okay, what's the contradiction?
On one hand, the state is perfectly willing to dedicate immense financial resources, thousands of man-hours, and deep investigative power to build a completely fake, fictitious minor. They construct a digital ghost, complete with chat logs and a fabricated identity, entirely for the purpose of testing a predator's intent. Society universally applauds this use of state power to protect a child who doesn't even exist.
I see where you're going. And on the other hand,
Privacy purists demand that the state legally forget the physical vehicle of an actual flesh and blood child who has just been abducted.
oh, wow.
They argue that maintaining a digital record of a physical car's location is a step too far. The author is arguing that it is philosophically perverse to build elaborate, high-tech entrapment systems around the fictional representation of harm while simultaneously demanding state-mandated amnesia when a real, physical victim is being driven away on a public road.
That is an incredibly heavy synthesis. I mean, to drive this point home about how we construct victims, the paper brings in two pieces of literature, which, again, I did not expect to find in a white paper about license plate readers.
The literary framing is essential to understanding the author's point about narrative construction, though.
Okay, let's go there.
First, the paper examines Vladimir Nabokov's novel Lolita. And it's crucial to note that the author uses Lolita not to debate the morality of the horrific acts depicted in the book, but as a lens to understand how a child is narratively constructed by an adult gaze.
Right.
In the novel, Dolores Hayes is a real physical person, but the identity of Lolita is a persona that the unreliable, predatory adult narrator, Humbert, forces upon her through his own narration. The victim's reality is swallowed by the adult's constructed language.
And the author contrasts that linguistic construction with William P. Young's novel, The Shack.
Yes. The Shack centers on a father who is confronting the brutal disappearance and murder of his young daughter.
It's a devastating book.
It really is. The paper uses this book as the ultimate representation of physical absence. In The Shack, the child is not a digital decoy. She's not a statutory category or a narrative persona constructed to test someone else's legal intent.
No.
She is a visceral, agonizing physical absence around which the parent's entire universe collapses.
So, by putting these side by side, the author is challenging our priorities as a society.
Exactly.
We have undercover sting operations dedicating massive resources to protect a constructed fictional victim from an intent to harm. And then we have the brutal geometric reality of physical absence when an actual child is taken.
Yes.
The argument is that if society can comfortably accept the intense, deceptive state power required to construct a fictional victim online, it must logically be able to accept the tightly governed use of an observational camera to locate a physical victim in the real world.
That is exactly the point. But it raises a deeper question. How do we decide what is acceptable state power and what is an unacceptable violation of privacy?
Right. Where is the line?
To understand how we resolve this contradiction between abstract rights and physical realities, the paper takes us through a deep dive into how the law fundamentally shapes what we consider to be a moral taboo in the first place.
Which leads us to an exploration of historical marriage laws. I have to admit, when I turned the page and saw a section on 18th century common law, I had to double-check I was reading the same paper.
I know, it seems like a detour, but it is actually the foundational blueprint for how we need to regulate technology.
Okay, how so?
The author dives into the history of legal capacity to prove that state policy actively shapes and often creates social morality over time. He starts by citing William Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, which is the foundational text of 18th century common law.
Right, a classic legal text.
Blackstone noted that the historical common law ages of consent for marriage were incredibly low, 14 for boys and 12 for girls.
Which sounds completely barbaric to a modern ear. Like, why were the ages set there?
Well, because in an agrarian society, the law was primarily concerned with property rights, inheritance, and physical maturity. It wasn't about modern developmental psychology.
Ah, okay. That makes sense for the time.
But over time, the needs of society changed, and so did the law. The author traces this evolution. He points to the British Age of Marriage Act of 1929, which raised the minimum age to 16, making marriages below that age legally void. And much later, a 2022 act raised it to 18.
The paper is careful to add some historical context here, right? Using census data.
Yes, the author uses median marriage ages from the 1890 U.S. Census to show that these old, low legal minimums did not necessarily reflect typical behavior.
Okay, so people weren't typically getting married at 12.
Right. It wasn't that the majority of the population was actually marrying at 12 years old.
Yeah.
But the legal capacity line, the boundary of what the state deemed permissible, was drawn there.
Okay, so how does the history of marriage laws connect to digital surveillance? I'm still trying to bridge that gap.
The author uses this history to outline a four-stage mechanism that he calls the law to taboo pipeline. This is crucial for understanding how we govern tech. I'll walk through the stages.
Please do.
Stage 1. The law defines a chronological or boundary line. For example, drawing a hard line at age 16 for marriage. Or in our case, drawing a hard line at 30 days for data retention.
Right, in stage 2.
Stage 2 is licensing and legibility. The modern bureaucratic state needs to be able to read its population, so it creates marriage licenses or birth certificates. It forces the abstract behavior into a legible, documented system that the state can track.
Which leads perfectly into stage 3, the gathering of statistics.
Exactly. Once the behavior is legible, the state gathers data. The paper argues that statistics fundamentally change sociology. Once you start categorizing relationships based on the new legal line, social scientists study them, public policy is written around them, and the behavior is quantified.
And finally, stage 4.
Stage 4 is where the statutory line hardens into a deep, cultural, moral taboo.
Okay, I see.
The author isn't claiming that a single law magically invented the concept of childhood innocence, but he is arguing that the law hardens boundaries into absolute categories. Over decades, what starts as a bureaucratic statutory threshold becomes a moral absolute in the minds of the public.
This is a massive revelation when applied to technology. Like, think about the implications of that.
It's huge.
The rules we write for these ALPR cameras today, right now in our local city councils, are literally programming the moral compass of the next generation.
Yes.
We aren't just debating database retention policies. We are deciding what the word privacy will fundamentally mean to our children.
That is the ultimate takeaway from the historical detour. If we let ALPR networks operate entirely lawlessly with indefinite data retention, federated networks left wide open, and searches conducted without warrants or audit logs, then mass surveillance simply becomes the background noise of modern life.
It just becomes normal.
Exactly. It becomes normalized.
Yeah.
The next generation won't even think to question it. But if we strictly govern it, if we mandate short retention times, demand strict warrants for broader searches, and severely punish misuse, then unauthorized tracking becomes a deep societal taboo.
So the governance itself creates the social meaning of the technology.
Precisely.
So we've explored the two extremes. On one side, total removal of the cameras like we saw in Ord, Nebraska. This creates dangerous, mathematically compounding blind spots that heavily benefit human traffickers.
Right.
On the other side, total, unregulated surveillance, which creates a dystopian nightmare of mass tracking and mission creep. We need a compromise.
We desperately need one.
We need a functional blueprint. And the paper provides exactly that, proposing what it calls the Nebraska Plus solution.
The author looks at Nebraska's existing Automatic License Plate Reader Privacy Act, praises it as a really solid foundation, but argues it needs much stricter controls to survive the modern federated tech landscape.
Makes sense.
The stated goal is the thesis of the paper: regulate the eye without blinding the road.
Let's break down the mechanics of this Nebraska Plus model, because this is where all the philosophy turns into hard, enforceable policy. How does it address the data retention issue?
The first tenet is a strict 30-day default retention limit. Currently, Nebraska law allows ALPR data to be kept for up to 180 days in ordinary circumstances.
Wow, half a year.
Yeah. The author argues that ELC is vastly too long for generalized surveillance. He proposes dropping it to 30 days, which actually aligns with the standard default offered by vendors like Flock.
But wait, let me push back on that, because I know exactly how law enforcement will respond.
What will they say?
Criminal investigations for complex cases like organized theft rings or long-term stalking often take months to develop. If the local police department has to automatically delete all the data after 30 days, aren't you severely handicapping detectives?
The model accounts for that. The 30-day limit is the default for unflagged data, the innocent commuter driving to work. If a detective is working a specific case and needs to retain a specific vehicle's data beyond 30 days, they can do so, but it requires friction. They have to obtain a specific sworn court order or a warrant to preserve that data for an ongoing case. It shifts the burden of proof back to the state.
Okay, that makes sense. It protects the innocent while allowing targeted investigation. What about the issue of automated enforcement? Because we've all seen stories of people getting pulled over at gunpoint because a camera misread a B as an H.
Oh, yeah, that happens. And that brings us to the second tenet: mandatory human verification of all alerts.
Okay, how does that work?
The OCR technology is incredible, but a computer translation of a dirty license plate can still be wrong. The Nebraska Plus model requires that before a police officer initiates a traffic stop based on an ALPR hit, they must visually confirm that the physical plate on the car matches the alert in the system.
So they have to look with their own eyes.
Exactly. The system's UI must require the officer to acknowledge this verification. It outlaws fully automated enforcement without a human in the loop.
And what about the Shaker Heights disaster? How does the model stop an agency halfway across the country from secretly searching a local town's cameras?
Tenet 3 explicitly disables default nationwide sharing.
Just turns it off completely.
Yes. The model demands that cross-agency access must be opt-in, strictly limited, and tied to specific named partner agencies. It kills the federated free-for-all, where 1,000 outside users can query your town's cameras without the local police chief even knowing.
Tenet 4 deals with what you are actually allowed to search for, right?
It does. The model explicitly prohibits personal, political, and associational searches. You cannot use the system to track a journalist who is writing a negative piece about the mayor. You cannot monitor protesters, and you cannot track license plates going into a specific medical clinic or a union meeting.
That's a huge protection.
The paper points to Henry County, Virginia as a real-world example because they actually implemented a policy explicitly forbidding these types of associational uses.
But policies are just paper without enforcement, which brings us to Tenet 5, mandatory independent audits.
This one is key.
Internal logs reviewed by the department's own IT guy are not enough. The model requires an independent, external inspector to randomly audit the search queries to ensure compliance with the law.
And if they find a violation?
That's Tenet 6. Severe civil and criminal consequences for misuse.
It can't just be a slap on the wrist.
No. If an officer intentionally abuses the system to track an ex-partner, it shouldn't just be an internal reprimand. The Nebraska Plus model demands immediate termination of employment, revocation of law enforcement certification, and criminal penalties for the unauthorized access of a government database.
The punishment must be severe enough to create the taboo we talked about earlier.
What the author is doing here is incredibly strategic. He is separating the vendor choice from the capability choice.
Yes, that is the absolute genius of the Nebraska Plus model.
Right. If a town hates how a specific tech company handles their data, they shouldn't just tear the cameras down and blind the road. They should fire the company. They should write a strict municipal contract demanding a 30-day retention limit, require independent audits, mandate that default sharing is turned off, and then hire a new vendor that legally agrees to those rules.
You retain the physical, geometric safety net of the road, but you impose fierce democratic control over the data.
The author synthesizes all of this into a 3-part design rule that just perfectly sums up the entire paper.
It's basically a mantra for modern surveillance.
It is. The rule is, make ordinary tracking difficult, make unauthorized tracking punishable, make legitimate emergency detection fast.
I love that.
Let's look at that last part, making emergency detection fast. Because we put all this friction in place, audits, 30-day limits, warrants, how does that not slow down the response when a child is actually taken?
The model solves this by proposing a serious crime fast lane.
Okay, a fast lane.
The architecture of the database is designed so that a confirmed Amber Alert bypasses the bureaucratic friction. Because time is of the essence, an Amber Alert immediately pings the entire network and pushes alerts to officers on patrol. But if a user tries to retrospectively track a political protester or an ex-spouse, they hit a massive programmatic wall. The software demands required case numbers, sworn statements, and triggers independent audits, backed by the threat of immediate employment termination.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today.
Oh, really? Yeah.
We started at a tense city council meeting in Ord, Nebraska, watching a small town grapple with the overwhelming reality of invisible digital cameras.
Yeah.
We dug into the cold mathematical geometry of blind spots, exploring how probability and physical roads dictate the rules of pursuit. We waded through some incredibly heavy philosophy, contrasting the massive resources the state spends constructing fictitious victims online with the demand that they ignore physical victims on the highway.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
Right.
We explored how the law literally shapes our cultural taboos over centuries, and we landed on a concrete, mathematically sound policy compromise, the Nebraska Plus model, that attempts to fiercely protect our civil liberties while presuming the absolute necessity of finding a real child in physical danger.
And if we step back and look at the broader implications of everything we've discussed today, it leaves us with something incredibly profound to consider.
Oh.
The author built this entire framework around the physical geometry of local highways.
Yeah.
But if we, as a society, eventually perfect this Nebraska Pluses model for our physical roads, if we successfully balance targeted, time-sensitive tracking with fierce, enforceable privacy walls and severe penalties for misuse, does this become the inevitable blueprint for our digital highways?
Wow. That's a phenomenal question.
Think about it. If we can strictly regulate the physical cameras on our streets to instantly catch predators without permanently tracking the mundane daily movements of innocent commuters,
Mm.
shouldn't we demand the exact same architecture for the invisible data trackers watching our every single move on the internet?
That is exactly what we should be demanding. Because the next time you are driving down your local main street with your coffee in the cup holder, passing that intersection by the pharmacy, you need to realize that you aren't just driving through a physical space.
No, you're not.
You are driving through a moral landscape that we are actively building right now, rule by rule, law by law. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the absolutes in your own communities, demand to see the mechanics behind the curtain, and we will see you next time.